credit cards in a number of different ways. Today we'll be having a look at these various different methods to enable you to choose which method is going to be best to suit your organisation. The best method for you will depend on a number of different things. For example, how many credit cards do you process, say, on a normal day, perhaps during the peak of one of your appeals, and if you have regular people who give via the auto deduct system, how many credit card donations do you process, say, on a monthly basis? Every time you process a credit card, there are costs involved, and depending on how you process the cards, which bank you're with, and a number of other things, there will be various costs associated with it. So you need to take those sorts of costs into account as well when you try to determine which is going to be the best practice for you. Also, you need to look at how much time is going to be involved from your point of view in actually processing the donations, and also in handling any of the rejections that may come. In the webinar today, we'll be looking at a number of different methods. We'll be first of all looking at the printed report for the bank. So that's the very basic method that everyone has the ability to do, where you essentially take a credit card form to the bank along with your cash and your checks. We'll also look at uploading files to the bank. So instead of sending that form to the bank via the taking it physically to the bank, you can upload a file of data that's created by Donman to the bank directly. We'll look at how you can use an FPOS terminal and how to enter those details into Donman, and we'll also look at using a gateway for the processing of donations. Now we're going to start by looking at how to enter donations. Now I'm going to combine the first two options together when it comes to entering of donations, because the method or the way that you enter those donations will be the same irrespective of whether you are sending a form to the bank or whether you are uploading a file to the bank. So the actual entry of the donations will be the same. So I'm going to go into into donation processing and record donations. Now I have actually already created a batch of 3 transactions. Down the bottom here you can see it says 3 transactions. Oh, I actually need to reset something here because I was having a bit of a play around before. So excuse me while I just do this. Okay, so back into donation processing. As I was saying, I have 3 donations in there. There is 1 cash and I think 2 checks. The reason that I've done that is they have no impact in terms of the actual entry of donations, so we're only going to concentrate on those things specific to the credit cards. So we'll go into record donations, and I'll just enter a new batch. So I'm going to say there's going to be 2 donations. Now, because these donations need to appear on our credit card form or on our file for the bank, we need to put those donations in as banked amounts, i.e. we have some money that we need to take to the bank. So I'll say there's $200 and I won't put anything pre-banked in. All right, so I'm sure you've probably all been here, so I'm just going to pick a donor, go through to the 3rd screen as per normal, and I'll put in $100. Now, when it comes to the pay method, we have a number of credit cards there. Typically, we've got the Visa, Mastercard, Amex, and Diners. We can use shortcuts for those. So if I type a V for Visa, it assumes it actually fills out the Visa in full. It's come up with a drawer name, and so long as that's the same as the card, that's fine. Now, it's asking me for our credit card number. Now, when I enter the details in here, there are 3 checks that it's going to do to make sure that, at least from its point of view, it's a valid card number. What it's going to do is, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to check that you've got the right number of digits. So if you only enter 15 digits or maybe 17, it will complain that that's the wrong number of digits. If the second check that it will do is that it will check the first 2 or 4 characters to make sure that they match the prefix for Visa. So if I have said it's Visa, but I put in something that starts with a 51, which is for Mastercard, then it's going to complain as that as well. Let me put one in here: 4444, 3333, 2222, 111. Now I'm actually going to put in a 2 at the end. The last digit in any credit card number is what we call a check digit, and that check digit is calculated based on any of digits before that. Now, for this to work, that last number should be a 1. So if I've mistyped something and I press enter, I get that message, this is not a valid card number. So I just need to make sure that I've typed it in right, and when I type in the correct digit, it then accepts it. It wants the security card number, so I'll just make something up there. Okay, expiry date. You don't have to put the slash in there, so I can go 10/15 and it just fills that out correctly. The authority is more for the old days where you used to have to ring up for an authorization number for perhaps any credit card or for credit card details over a certain amount. Normally that would be left blank. Yes, it has to be banked. I'm just going to shortcut the system by saying no, I'm not going to receipt those. And I'll just pop that into one of our campaigns. Okay, and the second one that I'll just do as a Mastercard. So it's all pretty much the same. I'll do M for Mastercard. And this time if I type in 234 6 here. So it says must be 16 characters. I think I've got 17, so I think this should be the right number. Okay, so again I'll just pop that in. So hopefully there's nothing new in what I'm doing here. At the end it says, do you want to check and close? So I'll say yes. That's balanced, $200 in there, and I go yes. Okay, so at this stage, assuming I have no more donations to process, I would then need to create the banking listing and the credit card listing. So if we're doing this via a credit card file, as in a report that we take to the bank, then when I go into the banking credit card listing, I'm simply going to say yes to the first question, and you can choose whether to do it in landscape or in portrait mode. I'll leave it as landscape. Now, the thing to be aware of, when we're running this, if we've asked for the credit cards to be printed out, it actually runs a separate program. So this is actually producing two separate reports, and I have a PDF maker which I use for my print driver. So if I go into this one, that in fact is the credit card report itself. Now I can probably expand that a little bit. So essentially you've got things like your merchant number and all the details up the top, and then for each of those individual transactions via credit card, I've got all the details here. And so typically this would be folded up, popped into a special envelope provided by the bank, and when you make your deposit at the bank with your cash and your checks, this would go with it. Now I'm going to close that down, and I'm going to have a quick look at the actual banking report. Okay, so this is the banking report. So this shows cash, checks, and credit cards. So you can see I've got some cash from Bill Gates and a couple of checks here as well, followed by my Visa and my Mastercard. Now, the reason that these need to appear here is because you're doing a deposit, which includes that form that you've just looked at before. So those things need to appear there. So that's how you would process and create those forms for the bank. If, however, you were, rather than doing that, you were doing it via a file that you wish to upload to the bank, then when you run your credit or your banking listing, you would typically say, no, I don't want to produce the credit card listing. That's of no use to you. But what you also need to be aware of is you don't want these credit card details to come out on the banking form, because you're no longer taking that form with you to the bank with the cash and checks. That's all you're taking there. So if I close that down, if I run this option here, so we can set you up with a slightly different option on your menu so that when you run the banking report, it doesn't include those credit card details on there. So I would say, no, I don't want to print the credit card forms. And because I've got that extra option, when I run this, those credit cards should not appear. Okay, so now we just have our cash and our checks, but the credit cards won't appear there. So if you do choose to upload your credit card data via a file for the bank, then you should be aware that you probably should be turning off that option or adding that option so that you don't actually output the credit card details. Okay, the rest of the end of day processing for those is pretty much the same, so I'll just run through those anyway because we're going to need to create another batch later on. I said no to receipting, so I can skip straight to the ledger report. Oh, okay. Oh yes, okay. Now, sorry, I skipped a little bit. Having done that that banking report without the credit cards on it, this is where you would need to create a file for the bank. So I've created one here. This is the option for Westpac, but I've also got another menu here, and this now lists most of the various options that we have. So depending on what bank you have, and some banks actually have two different types of files that you can create, we typically would have a program that would be available to you at no charge, and we can set that up to be on your main processing menu. So if I go back to my donation processing menu, in this case, we'll pretend to create a file for the Westpac Bank. So most of these will work pretty much the same. There will be some different questions depending on which bank that you're with, but essentially it's all fairly similar. So we're going to do it from today. This one has the ability to put it into multiple accounts, but I'm not going to use that option. There's a special number allocated by Westpac. I've got no Amex or Diners. Here's my file name, and you'll notice here that it's actually in a subdirectory under DM Work called WPAC. So when you upload the file for the bank, this is the file name, but it's going to be in the DM Work subdirectory called WPAC. Okay, so it's just a few options there. I'm going to pretend it's the first one I've done today, and when I run that, okay, so it's going to produce a report, but it also produces that file for the bank. Not a lot to be said here, $200, and that's all fine. So essentially, it says the file is now ready to be sent. So using software provided by the bank, you can then upload that file that we've just created. Okay, now that I've done that, I can actually run the ledger posting report. Okay. Again, nothing special here that you've not seen before, and then we'll run our end of day update. Okay, so again, it's fairly straightforward, something that you would see all the time. Now, the other side of this is what happens when you do your auto deducts. Essentially, it doesn't really matter whether you're doing an auto deduct batch or whether you've manually entered it. Those two reports, or the report and or the file for the bank, will come out the same, so long as you say when you're running your auto deduct, yes to banking those transactions. And Gary will be covering auto deductions a little bit later when he looks at the gateway processing, but essentially it would be the same for these ones. Okay, now the problem can be, especially if you've been sending the report to the bank, you're going to find out perhaps at a later stage that some of those donations didn't actually go through because the credit cards were rejected. In the case of where you're actually sending that report to the bank, you're not going to know that for probably several days. So when you find out that certain ones have been rejected, what you need to do essentially is reverse those donations out. You can contact the donor and perhaps find out if there's a problem. Maybe you can process those manually again if you need to. In the case where you're actually sending a file to the bank, typically that response from the bank will come back fairly quickly in a matter of minutes, maybe 20, 30 minutes at the most. If that's the case, rather than actually doing what I've done and going to and running through the end of day update, what you can do is you can wait for the response from the bank. So you create the file for the bank and then you wait. Any donations that have been rejected, you can actually open the batch and edit it and then remove those donations, so that when you then run through the ledger posting in the end of day, those donations will not be included. The other alternative that you have at that point is simply to undo the batch, which will effectively undo all of those donations, and you can then edit the pledge and then process that batch again. But under those circumstances, you would have to say no to banking so that that money wasn't appearing on your banking credit card listings again. I think the easiest thing under those circumstances, though, is simply to edit the batch. Okay, so we've had a look at how to process for where we're doing it via a file for the bank and also a credit card form for the bank. The other option that you can have without using the gateway is if you have an FPOS machine. Now, by FPOS, you might actually have a physical terminal there that you can process your credit cards through, or you may have some bank software that you can access over the internet where, again, you can enter credit card details and process them. Now, the beauty of using a system like that is that you can actually process the donation via the FPOS machine first, and then only those donations that have actually succeeded would you enter into the Donman system. So let's go in and record some donations, assuming that we've processed some donations via our FPOS machine. Now, in this case, we're going to say yes to a new batch. Again, I'll just do 2 donations, but this time, instead of saying that they're going to be banked, we're going to say that they're going to be pre-banked, because effectively, having gone through the FPOS machine, that money is already in the bank. So I'll do maybe $300 here. Okay, so I'll pick another donor. Okay, so this person's going to give me $150, one part. Now, you could, if you wanted to say Visa, but then you'd have to put all the details in again for no real purpose. So the suggested method is we just use E for FPOS, and you'll notice that it automatically skips down to bank yes or no, and it puts a no there. So that automatically makes it a pre-banked amount. And again, just to save time, I'm going to say that we're not going to receipt these. Okay, so again, whoops, we're going to put it through the same way. Okay, so there's our first one, and here's our second one. So again, just another FPOS. So it doesn't matter whether it was originally Visa or Mastercard or whatever. If it's already gone through the FPOS machine, that's all we need to do, just say E. Okay, so that's done, and our batch is closed. Now, we need to run our banking credit card listing. Well, actually, sorry, I take that back. We don't actually need to run this at all in this case. If we did have cash and checks, of course, which you probably would have, then you would need to run your banking credit card listing. So if I were to do it, if I presumed that I had some cash and some checks in there, again, I would just say no to that, because there are no credit cards to be printed out because they're all pre-banked. So I can actually skip that in this case. We don't need to create any file for the bank, so we could just skip straight to the ledger posting report and the end of day update. Now, when you're doing your auto deductions, the problem is that you need to get the credit card details so that you can punch those into your FPOS machine. Unlike where you've had it through the post, where the person's actually sent you those details, your details have actually been captured in the pledge record where you've set those up. And so you need to get those out. Now again, we want these donations to be pre-banked, so unlike the first time where we're doing it to a file or to the credit card form, when you run your auto deduct batch, you need to say no to bank the credit card details. Now I might just pop into that very briefly just to show you. So if we go to create auto deduct batch, okay, so there's a couple of options here. So it says, do you want to bank the credit card donations in this batch? So you would need to make sure that that was a no. And then a bit further down, it says here, do you want to print credit card numbers in full in your report so you can enter them into an FPOS machine? So you would say yes to that. So the report that the auto deduct program produces will show you a list of those credit cards that need to be processed. So they would be processed through your credit card machine. Now, if any of those get rejected, then you would have to delete those from the batch, as like with other rejections, as I mentioned earlier on. So that way the donations are pre-banked. They won't appear on the banking credit card listing. Well, the banking form, they won't appear there, but they will still go onto the system and you've already got the money into the bank. So you do have to be a little bit careful with some of those things when you do get the rejections from the auto deductions. But generally speaking, one of those three methods should suit most people if you're not doing large numbers of credit card donations. However, if you do have large numbers of credit cards each month, and especially if you've got a large number of auto deductions, then obviously putting those through an FPOS machine might be a bit of a pain. You might process normal donations through the FPOS machine, but choose to process the auto deductions as a file for the bank. So just because you use one method for, say, your manual donations doesn't mean that you can't use a different method for your auto deductions. However, if you do have large numbers of auto deductions, and if you do tend to get quite a number of rejections, then I think perhaps the gateway may well be a better option for you. And I'm now going to hand over to Gary, who will take you through that process of using the gateway, and especially how good that can be for processing auto deductions.
Just need to unmute yourself, Gary.
There you go. Okay, sorry about that. I muted myself. Lots of people would like to. So continuing from what Murray has gone through, where we're saying you know, we can process the credit cards, and there are obviously a number of different ways that we can get the of the credit card transactions to the bank. So, you know, using the printed report is something that a lot of the banks don't like anymore, because it means that somebody has to re-enter that at the bank's end. So that's obviously an overhead that the bank would prefer not to have, which is, you know, as volume goes up, the number of transactions, etc., then you would look at, you know, not doing that anymore and either uploading a credit card file to the bank, or, you know, doing something else, or what we're going to look at now is actually using a gateway. The two gateways that Donman does support are Secure Pay and eWay. And in Donman, once we actually purchase the module for the gateway, we can set that up by going into our Modify System Defaults. And you can see right down the bottom here, once the module is purchased, then you'll have the gateway enabled will be yes. And then there, I can bring up the screen where it says, am I using Secure Pay or eWay? Dialect is an old gateway that's not used anymore, and Florida Cash, as you see on the screen there, is purely a New Zealand gateway that's used. Okay, so for Australia, it's eWay and Secure Pay. For New Zealand, the only gateway you can use is Florida Cash, and even though there is eWay and Secure Pay there, the file formats are different that we actually send the details. From there, you'll then have the merchant numbers, etc., from the provider, so from Secure Pay or eWay. And at the moment, you can see I've got a question on the screen that says Enable Gateway Processing. Normally you would have that on yes, but I'll leave it on no at the moment, so I can sort of show you what will happen when we go to process payments if I have got the gateway. All the details are there, but I've actually disabled that. Okay, which in some cases we may want to do, depending on you know, if there's a donation we need to reverse, where we don't need to actually do anything with the transaction. It might just be because we put it into the wrong campaign. So in order to do that, I might turn off the gateway, fix that donation, and then turn it back on again. Okay. So if I now go into donation processing and record donations, okay, so the system's now coming up saying I have got the gateway. It's currently turned off. Do I want to turn it on? So normally I would say yes. Okay. In this case, I've got the test gateway because we don't have live details. And depending on the gateway that you're using, there'll be a bitmap on the screen up the top left here saying Secure Pay or eWay to let us know, or let you know as well, which gateway you're using. From there, setting up the batch is exactly the same. So I'm going to do 2 transactions, and just like if I was doing it through FPOS, after the batch or something, or I'm just sending the printed file to the bank, when I do them for the sake of the gateway, they are still going to be bank transactions at this stage. So if I said I've got $200 that I need to bank, okay, enter through. So from there, if I then find my donor by name or number, doesn't really matter, and go through. So the actual entry part of the transaction is exactly the same. Okay, so as I go through, I can still say that it was a Visa, like Murray showed you. You've got all the numbers. Okay, the credit card security number, there is a field for that on the screen, but it's not mandatory yet. I think it's only donations taken online that is mandatory, but no doubt there will be a time when the credit card providers say, we need that for every single transaction to try and stop some of the fraud that goes on. The field there, when it does become mandatory, that'll be a field that we have to get that, and it also means that when we get credit card details off our donors on forms or etc., we have to have a field so that people can fill that out for us. Okay. From there, expiry date, go through. And so in this case, again, like Murray did, I'm going to say, no, I don't need to receive it. So if I then choose my campaign, okay, so everything up to this point is exactly the same as you would enter it, just doing any of the other methods, really, except the FPOS for the pre-banked money. As I go through, you can see now it comes up with a screen saying, here's the details that are being sent to the gateway, and that will come through. And if the card's successful, it's going to come up with this message here saying the payment's been successful, the payment method is now changed to gateway. Okay? And it's now treated as a pre-bank. So you don't have to actually change any of the details in the batch. The system will do that for us in the background. So if I were to go back and look at that donor now, the pay method on the donation won't be Visa or Mastercard or whatever card type I put in. It will be gateway. Okay. As part of the gateway transaction, there are IDs for the actual transaction and a few other fields that from the details that come back to us from the gateway are now stored in the donation record in case it was a legitimate transaction that we did have to reverse and do a credit. If we were doing that, there is a pay method called GW reversal instead of a normal reversal. Okay, so if I find my next donor, okay, so exactly the same process. So in this case, my batch isn't going to balance, but it doesn't really matter. Okay, so you just go through, you do exactly the same thing, put your card number in, so you'll go through that whole process. So the value of this is that if there is a rejection, you'll know about it straight away. So it come up on the screen saying that the card was dishonored, or the payment hasn't gone through, etc. And you then get an option to remove that from the batch, and that the batch itself will still balance at the end, even though you've taken that transaction out, which is always a bit of a pain when you're doing manual transactions. If you have got to the stage where you're actually entering it, and then go through and say, oh, hold on, there's something wrong with this, I haven't got the expiry date on my form or whatever it might be, I have to then do those manually. Okay, so in this case, we're just using dummy numbers to put through. Okay. Like Murray was saying before, if I put a date in that's wrong or a credit card number are wrong, the system has as many checks and balances as we can in order to make sure that, if there's just a typo, that the system's not going to let that through. Okay. If it's the same campaign, again, I'll get to this stage, and again, I'll get the screen saying this is what's coming up, and it's saying, yes, it's all gone through. Okay. So in this case, the number of transactions has been reached, but because I didn't do it as a real batch, it's going to give me the error number, or the error screen, which I'm sure everyone has seen. But you can now see on here it says transactions to be banked was 0, but what I said was $30. Okay. And that's because in this case, I didn't actually balance the batch. If I now go back into record donation, if my screen behaves on me, okay, so I had a hidden message there. So if I say, no, I'm not entering a new batch, so I've got batch 32, But you can see now on the screen, it's saying there's 2 transactions, 0 to be banked and $170 pre-banked. So that happens as part of the system saying that the transaction is good, and it's changed the pay method to, as saw on the screen, to gateway. And it means that if I did have to come in and do something with one of those transactions, I have to make sure that I do put that it's now pre-banked money, it's not banked. Otherwise, I'm going to go into a vicious cycle and my batch will never close. Okay. So for that part, it's really no different to what you're doing now, except, as I said, the details of the transaction will go to the gateway. Straight away, you'll get notification whether it was good or bad. If it's bad, you get the option on the screen will come up saying, do you want to remove this from the batch totals? And we then have to address later with the donor to try and find out, why the card didn't go through, or, if there's something there, they might have maxed out the card, there might just be an error with it, etc. Exactly the same principle that we use for doing the manual record donations is if I've set up a pledge record, and I'm then going to use that to do my auto deductions. Okay. So if I go into my donor record, okay, so I've got a donor here, and they've got a pledge record. Okay, so on here, I've set up the pledge record for the person. I've got all the details. It's in my auto deduction campaign, and down the bottom, I've got all the details. Okay, if I go down in this case and say yes, it's a Visa, so I set my pledge up the same as you would do if you're doing a normal, everyday auto deduction batch, where I'm actually either creating the card file for the bank or I'm printing out the credit card form that Murray showed you earlier. So in this case, though, if I say edit the card number will come up. Again, I've got the field for the security number. Okay. So very quickly then, it's disappeared, but it popped up. So what the system's trying to do in this case, and I'm getting a bad result because I'm sort of on a test gateway with numbers, but the system at that point will try and send the credit card details and the expiry date to the gateway, and what will be returned will be a token. Okay, so it means that in my database, I don't actually have, especially for the pledge records, I don't have the credit card number in plain view that anyone can do anything with. Even if I haven't done that, the system by default encrypts the credit card number. So if someone were to do a report on the pledge file, they still can't really get the card numbers unless I'm on a screen like this where it is decrypting them, so I can actually do that update and entry. So if the gateway had been successful, in this case I'm using SecurePay, so it would have something like this, and then would have a number that is to do with the token that the gateway will generate. When I do auto deductions from there on down, the system will send the token for the payment rather than the card details. If the donor has given us new card details, we come into the pledge as normal, update the card details and the expiry date, and there'll be a new token generated from those details. Okay. So it just means that I don't actually have to have the credit card details in my system, and it goes a whole long way to getting us more towards being PCI compliant, because we don't have those. Because in fundraising we do a whole lot of stuff with mail-outs and stuff like that, it's going to be a long time before we never see credit card numbers, unless everything's done online, but I think we're a long, long way from that. Okay. But in the pledge, setting it up, as you can see, no different. It just means if I've got the gateway on, the system will try and generate the token. If I've got a whole lot of pledges that are already set up in the system and they've got the credit card numbers and everything like that, and I said, okay, now I've got a gateway, I've enabled it, I've turned on everything, and what I want to do is run the program to go through all of my credit cards and generate a token from those. Okay. If you do this, it's fairly much a one-off process. When the gateway is enabled, Murray or myself will probably get your menu, and we'll update it to add things there. So where on this particular menu I've got the bulk encrypt credit card data, there would be an option that says get bulk tokens for the credit cards. So I run that, and that will go through exactly the same mechanism as I did manually, and we'll try and generate a token for each of the credit card details in each of the pledges and replace the credit card number with a token. For doing the auto deductions from that, whether I have a token in there or I have the actual credit card number, makes no difference to the system. It still sends the details the same way. So if I go into auto deduct, create my auto deduction batch, again I've got my my gateway test mode on. So when I'm doing it normally, I say no, I don't care about particular campaigns. I'm doing credit cards. Okay, I don't want to receipt the donations. Yes, I want to bank them. Okay, so very important, because just like when I was doing the batch manually, at this point I still have to say yes, the donations have to be banked. If I say no here, nothing's going to happen for all purposes. It'll run through and do all the processes, but the details aren't going to actually reach the bank because they're not going to hit the gateway. Okay, so yes. Okay, so gateway test mode is on. So in this case, it's telling me again. Okay, exclude expired credit cards. Normally yes. Yeah, and they'll come out on the printed form for the auto deduction to show me which ones were expired. We have covered doing letters to people or contacting people by looking at the lapsed credit card report. So something that we should be proactive on, not wait until we do the auto deduction and say, oh, these ones are missed because the credit card's expired. Okay. From there, if we're doing Amex or diners, will be the same sort of thing, where we can say include or exclude, and whether I need to bank that money, yes or no. By default, the system will put the current date you're running the program as the date to see if the pledge is due. So if my pledge was due yesterday or any past date, the system will pick them up. Okay. This is useful in the case where I've got somebody that for some reason their card didn't go through a particular month. So it means that their date of next gift would not have incremented up one period. So whether it be monthly or quarterly or annually as it goes through. Okay. Process pledges due up to the end of the month as due today is totally up to you, but most organisations set the pledge date to be the date that you do the actual auto deduction run, so it's normally not necessary. Okay. As Murray showed you before, if I'm doing this and I wanted to print the credit card report showing the full credit card number, I've got that option, but in the case of Gateway, that's irrelevant. Okay. There is an option now, because I'm using Gateway, that says for Gateway transactions, set the next date ahead, even if the card's rejected. So that means if for some reason the person's credit card isn't honoured this month, it might be because there's just a problem with the card, or it's, you know, they've maxed out, or whatever it is, I still get the option to move the pledge date up one period, so that I then end up with, you know, the date thing because people haven't made the payment. If you do that, totally up to you, or, you know, as an organisation, but it does mean that you won't be able to look at the pledges that, you know, based on the date of next gift that haven't gone through. The only thing you could use on the pledge record is the date last paid. Okay, so it's an option that you can have, and different organisations say, yes, we want that, and other people will say no. In my case, I'm going to say no. If it's rejected, I don't want to increment that date. Okay, so if I go through and say yes, I want to do a actual run. Okay, so just like we saw on the manual screen, the system's now sending the details through the gateway. Okay, so for all the different transactions, the different card numbers, etc. So they'll go through, okay, until I get to the end of my batch. Okay, so in this case, it's saying I've got my 10 transactions that have gone through. I'll get my report as normal, but I can now see that the card is saying that it's a gateway. Okay, so even though in the pledge record it might say Visa, Mastercard, Amex, etc., because the transaction's gone through, it's now saying gateway, and I'm still getting, you know, the first 4 digits, the last 4 digits, but I'm not getting the full number because for all purposes I really don't need it. Okay. If I'm doing an auto deduction and I do get rejects, because there's every chance that we're going to get those, in your DM work directory, the system will automatically, or just have a look here, okay, so I'll just go into the folder. Okay, so you can see now that there's a file called Gateway Rejects. So if you did have rejects, and that will come up as part of that process, so it doesn't stop at every single one, but it would have all the details. So you'll have the donor number, the campaign, their name and address, the amount, you know, the bounce back reason. So this will automatically be in this file that you can then look at, because these are people that we need to contact, or the donors, to try and, you know, find out why the card hasn't been honoured. Some of the reasons will be explanatory, as you see, and some may just be that there's a problem with the person's card. Yeah? So you can look at this file, and the system, just like it does with most of the reports, there'll be gateway rejects and then gateway rejects 1 to 7 for the last 7 lots of auto deductions that we've done by using the gateway. So you can look at that file, and that'll give you all the details of basically what's gone through. If perchance I was doing some processing, here, and I said I need to do something to, we sort of indicated before, if I need to fix something up because I put money into the wrong campaign or what it might be. The easiest way to turn the gateway on and off is if you go onto your version tab, you'll see there's a checkbox there that says Enable Gateway Donation Processing. Okay, so if I turn that off, I'm going to get a message to indicate that I've now disabled the gateway, and it means that if I go into Process, I still get here, but I can say, no, don't enable the gateway, and then I can do a batch of normal reversals to fix up something like it's a ledger code that's wrong or a campaign that's wrong, anything like that. The only difference would be when I try and process it, the system will come up saying this was originally a gateway transaction, and it'll give you the option to automatically change it to be a gateway reversal so that everything sort of goes through. If it was something I actually needed to credit to a person, then I wouldn't have turned the gateway off, and it means I can do a reversal, and it will send all the details back to the gateway, and that should issue a credit to the person's card. So I can sort of go through from there. Okay. So as I said, on the pledge records, we set it up pretty much the way that we always have. If I have turned the gateway off for some reason and I don't remember to manually do it, it's not a big problem because the system will, every time you go in, alert you that you've got the gateway and it's turned off. If you perchance have lost an internet connection or something like that, again, when you start the processing, because I can't show you that because I'll disconnect you, but you'll get a message saying that you haven't got the gateway or there's some error. So again, everything that we can sort of check along the way, the system will tell you that there's something wrong with either the connection or we haven't got the details filled in on the gateway screen properly, so all the account details. So if anything's missing that should be there, again, the system will sort of alert you and say, hang on, there's something wrong with your gateway. Okay. So if I were to go back into my setup, okay, so yes, so if the chance I have something in here, so on the different gateways have got different rules of what you need to and what you don't need to send. If you've got a refund for doing a credit back to a person's card, that's where you would need the password for that. And I think on eWay then you have a gateway username and a password. Secure Pay slightly different. You would have a merchant number that would be something like this where it's alphanumeric and then numeric characters. Okay. So even in here I could go back on and say, okay, I want to enable the gateway. Okay. So at that point it's let me get through without putting in all those other details. But if I go back into my processing now, and again I've got, okay, so it's now telling me that there's an error with my gateway setup. So if we haven't done something correctly there, the system's going to stop me from processing those. So it means I have to go back into the setup and put in something that should be there in order to actually process. So you can't sort of get through half the details there because it's so intrinsic to the transaction going through and all the details coming back and being saved as part of that donation that we can't have it where you haven't got the merchant details in there or other things that are required by the gateway, because for each transaction it sends a file in a format that the gateway is specified that goes through and has certain fields. So if the field's missing, of course, the transaction is going to be rejected from get-go. Okay. So for most of the things, it's still going to be the same. As Murray said, when we're doing the credit cards, whether we're doing them for a printed report or anything, it would only be in the case of if I've processed them through an FPOS terminal previously or I've done that online using the virtual FPOS, that I would treat them as pre-banked. Everything else we do goes in as banked. So when I do my batch, I'm still getting my error messages because I haven't set that up properly. Okay. So it doesn't matter what I do now until I go back and fix that up. But it just means when you set up the batch, unless it has gone through FPOS and it is pre-banked, always say, yes, I need to bank this. whether we're doing the manual transactions or we're doing the auto deduction, so that we make sure that everything does go through. Okay. The value of the gateway, of course, is dependent on volume of transactions, because it doesn't matter how you process credit cards, there's going to be a cost associated with it. You know, there's merchant fees, there's gateway fees, there's fees on just about every step of the process, because everyone else is having a hand. If a credit card is rejected when we're using the gateway, there's different numbers or different codes to come back to say this is why the card was rejected. If you're using Gateway, the Gateway Secure Pay or eWay, on both of their websites, there is a file that you can download, or a PDF that shows you what all the error codes. But for most purposes, you won't need to worry about the specifics, because Donman will capture the error and put it into the reject log, so we'll be able to see why it didn't go through. So it might be that the card's maxed out, or there is just some issue with the card, or something. So that there are quite a number of different reasons that a credit card won't go through. If I tokenize the payment, so I've actually created a token instead of the credit card number, the system by default has said we'll use that until such time as I update that. And something that we've sort of come across recently is if it's a token payment, I think it's seen by the gateway as a recurring payment, because a one-off payment will have the card detail in full and the expiry date, whereas for everything that's got the token, it really just sends the token. The gateway then interprets that to be the full card number and the expiry date, which goes to the bank, and the bank says, yes, the payment's good or bad. Yeah. So there's quite a few different things, and really it depends on volume and everything like that that we're doing for the credit card. But for all the people that are still, printing out the forms and, stuffing the envelopes and stuff like that, certainly for, future, look at, one of the many ways to create a credit card file to get it to the bank, or, investigate using Gateway. If you do web donations, of course, everyone's, bought something online, you'll see that all the payments will go through a secure gateway, exactly the same as they would do if you had a Donman website that's got the gateway enabled. The gateway in Donman is really just an extension of that, so that instead of me having to, enter it in Donman or put it through the POS first and then sort of double enter that transaction, I can do it once, and straight away I'm going to know if the payment's good or bad. I don't have to have any sort of come back after that, except if it's a rejected card. Okay, so that's sort of a nutshell of what the gateway will do and what the credit card files that you can create out of the system. And for most of the banking, as you saw, it doesn't really matter, or it doesn't change much how we do the actual entry. It's really just saying that there's options after we do the entry for how we actually get those details to the bank, because the printed card is something that is being phased out slowly. And as I said, because the banks are saying, well, somebody at the bank has to do that. And one of the problems, of course, is that that's in human interaction. So if I've had a problem with the bank where they've put in a wrong merchant number, or they've done something else with that, we might find that the money's credited to the wrong account, and because then it has to be fixed up at the bank's end, because we'll say, well, hang on, where's my funds? So it can cause problems where if I'm using the credit card files or the gateway, then that's not going to happen, because everything's predefined and set up in the system. Anyway, so I'll finish there, and we'll go back to Marla, and we'll go through any questions and things of what people have got about the credit card processing.
Thanks, Gary, and thank you, Murray. A couple of questions already posted, but just a reminder that if anyone does have any questions, we've got a few minutes to run through them, so just post them in the question pane and we'll get to them. So first up was from Ida. Hopefully I've pronounced her name correctly. She said, interesting webinar, so thank you guys. Are you able to process Amex via Gateway? She said that they currently process all Amex donations via the FPOS terminal, as the funds are received in their bank account within 24 hours. If they were to send the payment summary to Amex, it takes approximately 10 days before the funds are received in their bank account.
Yeah, there are different organisations that do that, and with Amex and Diners being their own sort of beast, I think it depends on your bank on whether you can do that or not. There's no, because the gateway itself, and the account you have enable or not enable the Amex and Diners, and it depends on merchant codes and things like that. But certainly you can, in theory, but it would depend on your particular bank that, will say yes, you can do that or not, because whether people are creating a credit card file, even that is a restriction for some people on those card types. So in theory, yes.
Thanks, Gary. Colleen's also asking what the cost of the Gateway program is.
The Gateway module for Donman is $600, and as well as that, you would have to have a internet merchant account with your bank in order to do the transactions, because obviously it's just like having it on the website. It is an internet transaction, so everything goes through the gateway via the internet to the bank. It's the bank that actually says the payment's good or bad. The gateway is really just the middleman.
Okay. Cecilia's asking if you can if you can verify how to process refunds for FPOS and checks, bounce checks.
Oh, for a bounce check is just a standard reversal. Okay, so if I were to go in here, because I've got my gateway stuffed up, give me a second. Okay, so let me just go back and turn that off at the moment. Okay.
But Gary, just while you're doing that, I'm not sure if this is along the same lines from Ida. If using Gateway, can your batch include multiple methods of payment, i.e. cash, FPOS, checks, and credit cards?
Yeah, but when you do an auto deduction batch, it will only be credit cards anyway. If you're doing Gateway, you'd have to do checks and cash and stuff as a separate batch.
No, well, I think she's talking about manual processing, Gary, and the answer is yes. If you're doing a normal batch, you can process checks, cash, and credit cards that you do via the Gateway, all in the one batch.
Okay. So if I were reversing a transaction, when I do my batch, in this case, I haven't looked up a donor, which I normally should have, to get the details of the transaction. So I'm just going to say I've got one transaction. There's nothing to bank because I'm taking the money out of the system, and then it's pre-banked. If it's something that I'm correcting, then at this point I would have two transactions, and I'd have double the original amount because I'm taking $20 out and putting $20 back in. In this case, I'll just look at a straight transaction. The other part's just putting it back in again. So as I go through, I would then find my donor. If I go through to the third screen, when you're on the processing screen, you can then click on the $ at the bottom, and that will show you all the person's transaction history. So if I said this is the donation that I put into the wrong campaign or whatever it might be and I need to reverse it, I can then double click on that transaction. I get the error or the message here saying yes. And when I say that, you can see the system's now filled out all the details of the original transaction, except it's changed the pay method now to be reversal. What this means is that at the end of day process, the original transaction details will go from the donation file into a reversal file. Okay, so once I get to there, it's giving me an alert saying this is being processed as a reversal. Okay, and from there it's saying, well, the original pay method was, in this case, was a Visa one. Okay, and that's happened automatically. Okay, so that's as hard as it should be to do my reversals. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks, Gary, and that looks to be all of our questions for today. So thank you very much for that. There's a couple that have just coming through now, but we are running out of time. Just quickly, Gary, if you can, Susan's just asking, can you show us a gateway reversal? Not the refund, just the, not the refund, not just the reversal. The refund, not just the reversal. Sorry.
Well, it's exactly
the problem
the
when
same.
I get a late question, I'm sorry, I can't read it properly.
Yeah. The mechanism is exactly the same, except if the original one had been a gateway, okay, and this is where I haven't looked up a donor to see who's made a gateway transaction, but when I go through to the third screen and I choose the transaction, if the original pay method up here was a gateway, then the system will come up with an alert to say this was originally a gateway, do you want to do it as a gateway reversal? From there, you enter through exactly the same, and you'll get that same screen come up showing that it's sending the details to the gateway. So that's really the only difference between the two.
Alrighty. Okay, I think we're done. So thank you, Gary and Murray, for today's webcast. Some good questions there. Our next webcast is scheduled for Tuesday the 16th of September at 2 o'clock, and we're looking at importing data into Donman at that webcast. So it's a new topic for us, and we'll cover the general import program as well as other common Donman import programs. So Tuesday the 16th of September, details will be sent out to you shortly on that. Now, if you do have any other questions on today's topic, please feel free to log them now, and we'll pick them up and contact you directly in the next few minutes if you can log those. Otherwise, do contact us on info_donman@advsol.com, or feel free to give us a call. So that concludes our webcast for today. Thank you again for joining us. And quickly, you will find recordings of our other webcasts at our website at donman.net.au. Just go to the What's New section, and you'll find our previous webcast, and today's webcast will be up there in the next week or so as well. Alrighty, so thank you again. Thank you, Gary and Murray, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye now.
Bye.